presentation is called Triangle of the Aquarian Age, Britain, Russia, and USA. Now, I realize I might be going over things that we've looked at yesterday and today even, but as I said before, repetition doesn't hurt to really carve into our minds the understanding of some of the essential energies we're dealing with nations. So there will be some repetition here, but we're looking also at the subject from slightly different angles. And so we are looking at the fundamental forces of this triangle: Ray 2, love, wisdom, soul ray of both the USA, of Britain, where it says 2621 here. Ray 6, idealism, devotion, which is the outgoing cycle of the ray now. And the personality ray of both USA and Russia. Okay. Then we're looking at ray 7 as the soul ray of Russia, the incoming cycle of the seventh ray, which is gaining in strength rapidly, I think. And we're also looking at ray 1 and its power. It's supposedly out of incarnation at the moment, but is coming into power, back into expression again. And so they are the ray forces of the nations. And then we have the zodiacal forces through which the rays express: USA, Aquarius soul; Russia, Aquarius soul; USA, Gemini personality; Britain, Gemini soul. So we can see these connections between nations, as Melbourne and others have mentioned yesterday. And Russia, of course, has a Leo personality, the opposite sign to Aquarius. Britain has a Taurus personality. Quite often in the personality expressions of nations can be problematic, or can express the shadow of that particular nation, but also in the distorted expression of the soul qualities too. For instance, Britain is a Gemini soul, and the Tibetan mentions in esoteric astrology how Britain expressed many of the lower expressions of Gemini throughout its career, if you like. And equally so, it's able to express, of course, the higher note of Gemini. Gemini being the sign of communications primarily. So there we have, and I'm going to be, in this presentation, I'm going to be coming back to some of these themes. So don't worry if you don't take all this in right now. I know some of you have been looking at this for a few years anyway, through my newsletters and so forth. But this is the triangle of the Aquarian age. And we deal with what is, what we have before us, these nations that the Master has told us has the karma and the dharma to lead us into the next 2,000-year cycle. So it's an extraordinarily important group of energies that we're looking at here. If we are to bring about the healing of nations, we must understand the essential qualities of energy that they carry astrologically and rheologically. So, and this quote we go through again just briefly. There are three great fusing energies or vital centers present upon our planet. Russia, fusing and blending Eastern Europe and Western and Northern Asia. And so we go down to our little mini map down here, and where Geneva is broadcasting from, to see part of that. And of course, the greater map at the top here, the vast expanse of Russia. Hence its blending of Europe and Western and Northern Asia. 2, the United States and later South America, he has here in brackets, fusing and blending Central and Western Europe and the entire Western Hemisphere. Hang on a second. That's not right. I think something's jumped out of context there. Just a moment. Just going to look something up here. That's correct. So, where am I? Trying to pick up my screen here. There we are. So, this really is an important statement because in terms of New York being one of the 5 major planetary centers, with its jurisdiction over the Americas, as I mentioned yesterday, the United States as a whole has a fusing and blending role in Central and Western Europe and the entire Western Hemisphere. So we can't divorce Europe from USA in so many different ways. Of course, as I said yesterday, USA is Europe transplanted. And 3, the British Empire, fusing and blending races and men throughout the entire world. In the hands of these nations lies the destiny of the planet. This is from Destiny of the Nations, page 104. So quite an extraordinary statement that we really is such a fundamental, foundational factor that we have to always have in consideration with Europe. One of the main reasons why there lies the destiny of the planet is because Russia and USA have Aquarian souls, as I mentioned yesterday, and only one other nation has an Aquarian soul, and that is the Netherlands or Holland. So I want to just briefly touch upon Britain. Well, all of them, but Britain in this particular slide. The leading nation of the 5th root race, a spiritually advanced nation in the family of nations, we are told by DK, and which, of course, is home to London, one of the 5 major planetary centers, proposed as the throat chakra of the planet, or mind, where the mental vehicle is anchored. And Britain's Gemini soul is in harmonious trine to the Aquarian souls of USA and Russia. So Britain down here, Gemini, Aquarius, USA, Aquarius, Russia. It's not a proper grand trine in there as the zodiac shows, but it's just giving you that sort of visual. So Gemini here plays a very important role because it is the communicator. It is the bridging antikarana kind of energy, is the sign of relationships par excellence, where Gemini is able to find something in common with an individual, a group, or a nation, and that leads to a dialogue and friendship. So we often think of Libra as being more the sign of, but that's more to do with personal, individual relationships, although it has a connection to Gemini. So, and in fact, Libra rules London. London creates an air-ground trine to Aquarius and Gemini. So we have the whole air-ground trine activated through Britain and London and their ruling signs, the Gemini soul of Britain and the Libra personality of London. Now, and this, so, and I've underlined this word here, theoretically, this allows harmony between the 3 nations. But that is being blocked at the moment for the various reasons that we've talked about and will talk about during the conference. And so Britain's stubborn and deeply materialistic Taurus personality, as I've written about many times in my newsletters and books, is in T-square to USA's Russia, Aquarius, Leo configuration. So just got over here, Britain, Taurus personality. Moscow is a Taurus soul. So there's a direct connection between Britain and Moscow in this respect, the points in common. And yet Britain's Taurus personality makes a T-square to London's Leo soul and USA, Russia's Aquarius soul. So there's all sorts of dynamics going on here that would take a couple of chapters of a book, I think, to really tease out and show you in a way that's much clearer than what I'm showing here. But just to touch upon these relationships that exist between major cities in Europe or around the world and the nations themselves. At least that's how I see Britain's Taurus personality currently. All entities do change their personality rays and zodiac signs at different times. But I still see Britain with a Taurus personality at this point in time. The problem preventing, in my view, my personal view, preventing unity of nations, of this nation's triangle, is the revival of the Cold War against Russia by NATO and the West. Propaganda and demonization of Russia's actions and leaders. Of course, Russia, like any other nation, is no saint. It has its pitfalls, it has its shadow, but this is how I perceive the current situation. And so what has happened is that Britain has been almost taken over by USA in many ways. Strongly, it's an understatement to say that Britain is strongly influenced by USA and NATO. And so together with other European nations, they have exercised constant military exercises and threats. And Russia has been virtually surrounded by NATO nations or strategically placed military forces, as this map shows here. NATO is in the dark blue countries here, from Turkey in the south here, around to, what is that, Lithuania and those countries up there, Estonia, perhaps, Baltic states. Sweden now in the mix, but not coloured on this map. Norway, and the bulk of Western Europe, with a few patches indicating different degrees of association with NATO. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that was set up after World War II to keep a control over Europe, to for all the reasons, I think Melvin said yesterday, what was it? To keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the USA in. Correct me if I'm wrong there. I kind of probably mangled that, but it's a very outdated organization that should have started to go out of business, so to speak, in the 1990s when the USSR was finished, but it kept going because of old thought forms and hatreds from decades in the early decades ago in the early 20th century. So I see the seeds of harmony between these nations can be sown only if their national souls can be awoken, and I don't see, at least in USA and Britain at the moment, they've lost their way completely. I don't see the soul connection. And so they need some help subjectively for their, obviously there are people in both nations who are soul aware, but at the moment, the dominance of the material forces over both these nations I don't know so much for Russia, but it's easy to see with USA and Britain, as I've mentioned frequently in my newsletters in the last few years. So don't take my word for it, of course. One has to do one's own research and with these matters and try to blend the esoteric with the exoteric. So the best approach to create harmony, directing energy rightly in group cooperation, is invoking the souls of nations, ignoring the personalities of their leaders too, by the way. That's a big one. So, and just briefly, when we visualize in the meditation this morning, we see Geneva as the eye of the triangle, and Geneva being a first-ray soul with a second-ray personality, which I think is an incredible combination and so pertinent and relevant to this triangle, given the fact that USA and Britain are both second-ray souls. Russia does have a lot of second ray as well, by the way, in a passage that I've quoted a few times in newsletters. It's not just the 7-6 here. There's DK discusses the second ray presence with Russia. Perhaps Svetlana or Dennis can elaborate on that later on today. But the Russia that DK was referring to, the Tibetan was referring to when he wrote those books, included Ukraine, the old USSR, and Belarus, and maybe a couple of other states I can't think of right now. So I'll be talking more about Geneva in my next presentation tomorrow. So just looking at the chat here. Okay, just a bit of chatter going on there. That's fine. So again, we went through this in the meditation. In meditation, we pour the light of our group soul through the 3 cities of these nations. You may have noticed that I referred to the Kremlin as the old part of Moscow because it has a lot of negative connotations, unfortunately. You see the newspaper saying the Kremlin, the evil heart of Moscow and all that kind of stuff. We have to break through a lot of these old thought forms and tropes that have been existing for decades. And this is the subject of my talk on propaganda in the 4th day of the conference, where we look at, and in fact, I do mention it a bit further on in this presentation as well. So the mottos of these nations: USA, I light the way, just as the beautiful Statue of Liberty icon represents, an icon for the planet, not just the USA. Britain, I serve through theoretically the rule of law, but we've seen this rule of law deteriorate considerably in the last few years. Russia, I link the two ways between the East and the West. And so Christina mentioned yesterday the well-known quote of DK about the Near East. So many of the world's insoluble problems can be only solved at the subjective level. This is what I said yesterday as well. Meditating groups of the new group of world servers can transform crystallized thought forms within the planetary mental body. Some are very ancient, even thousands of years old. These thought forms, clairvoyantly perceived, can be seen as patches of dark clouds around the planet, such as the very large one that is hovering over, quote, the entire area of the Near East and Europe, Greece, Yugoslavia, Turkey, Palestine, the Arab states, Egypt, and Russia are under a heavy overshadowing cloud. Not sure what book that's from. It's from one of the Tibetan's books. And this circle here pretty much encapsulates that area, which of course includes at least southern Russia and Ukraine, Romania, Slovakia, Greece, Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, of course, and Libya. And that, of course, has been a major trouble spot for all the oil wars that we've seen in the last century or so, on and off, of the plundering of resources in the Middle East. But this overshadowing cloud is thousands of years old, if not more. These ancient thought forms and shadows of the various nations combined have created a dark spot on the planet. And there may be other dark spots around the planet as well, of course, but this is one of the major ones that is in the proximity of Europe that is difficult to dislodge. And in some meditation groups that work with DK's formula of dispelling glamour from his book, Glamour, A World Problem, are working with this, applying the formula that DK has given for individual and or group dispelling of glamour on a regular basis, on a weekly basis with a group to visualize sending, dispelling lighted energy to these areas of the world. As I said here, so many of the world's insoluble problems can only be solved at the subjective level, which means working on the mental plane, dissolving these thought forms upon the astral and mental plane. This is where the many centuries of glamour have compounded the strength of these thought forms, these crystallized old patterns upon the mental plane. So, just going to the chat for a second. Someone's dropped in the passage. Thank you, Alexander. Irina says, what you see in the triangle is the image representing Moscow here. It's not the Kremlin, unless someone wants to be representation to be the one prominent Orthodox Christian churches of Moscow. Thanks for clarification there. But I'm just looking at iconic images like Big Ben, the old buildings in Moscow. Of course, modern Moscow is a completely different city. It's quite amazing. So as 2025 approaches, the centennial conclave of the hierarchy in Shambhala is about to get underway, just around the corner. It's minutes away in terms of the long-term cycles. And there's much to do to offset the onslaught of materialistic forces upon humanity, which really upped the ante in the last few years, since 2020, I think, through their conscious and unconscious minions on the planet. These methods of meditation by dedicated and organized groups are one of the key solutions to fighting this battle. But of course, there are many people at the coalface in the outer world. We're talking about the esoteric battle on the inner planes here, working subjectively and applying what we can practically from the esoteric teaching. Occult meditation is not easy. It takes a lot of concentration to direct energy correctly and to stay focused and stabilized individually, let alone as a group. So we are really beginners in this area. The Tibetan's amazing statement that World War II could have been avoided if groups of meditators had done the requisite work to diffuse the buildup of fascism in the 1930s. There is a few statements that you can find that don't exactly spell that out, but if you type in could have been avoided, you'll get 3 or 4 statements by the Tibetan in various books where he alludes to this. The fact that 40 or 50 people in a group where, I'm just guessing here, experienced and disciplined meditators, that World War II could have been avoided on the physical plane. This is an amazing statement when we think of how many million were killed. Was it 60 million people? And the suffering and the loss of human life and the tragedies, truly extraordinary. So we won't get fooled again, to paraphrase the Who, hopefully in this cycle, in terms of not going to sleep at our posts, for the esoteric workers, the new group of world servers, to be awake and to really strive to work in groups and apply the esoteric teachings, the subjective teachings, objectively. So in this diagram, of which I had in a newsletter a few months ago, I think, I linked up the, similar to what Malcolm showed us yesterday, the soul and personality signs of Leo. The blue stars, such as the one in Romania here, are the soul of that nation. The red stars are the personality. So Romania has a Leo soul. Italy has a Leo soul, but Rome has a Leo personality. So it's interesting, the double emphasis of Leo here. Plus, of course, the other fire sign, Sagittarius, in Italy's makeup. Then, of course, we have Geneva, ruled by Leo. Then we have Paris, ruled by Leo at the personality level. Or was that France? Which one? Leo being the soul of London, Berlin having a Leo personality, and Moscow having a Leo personality. So a lot of Leo in Europe, as Melvin was saying yesterday. What does Leo mean? Leo is a sign of leadership. It's also the sign of the dictator too, of course. It depends on what expression is working out and what stage of evolutionary unfoldment that nation is at. And Leo represents the will to illumine, as in the sun that rules Leo and shines its light into all the shadowy places. London's Leo is a good example of Rule Britannia, for instance. Britannia rules the British Commonwealth, if you like. And that's certainly worked out well in many ways, but also, of course, had its shadow or imperfect expression. So this is just one example of how we can draw different maps around Europe to work with energies, to focus in really specifically on some of the energies that are there, see how they're being used by studying the local history, present history and older history, and work out various relationships, the various triangles within this particular pattern here, of course. So it's a big job, and that's something that will take probably decades or centuries for esoteric students to apply. But we are making a very humble start with this in this early part of this century. So there are different individuals and groups working with these energies on a more general scale, but there's much more specific work to be done in the future. So how do we as esoteric students transcend our differences of opinion on the world situation? We all have opinions that are gleaned from varying degrees of informing ourselves. How well informed are we? I don't intend to answer all these questions, by the way. These are rhetorical questions. How much cultural and media conditioning affects our point of view? How much has decades of propaganda built our worldview? How true is this fact? One group, a minority, feels that the Western narrative is totally wrong, whilst a majority, perhaps, appears to think that the USA-NATO narrative is correct. Which group holds the truth, or is it somewhere in between? Who is capable of being able to maintain a true dialogue or dialectic? This is something that I asked in our Telegram forum that we've been running for the last few weeks. I believe very few people know how to truly dialogue. The lost art from ancient Greece that I think has been somewhat distorted in modern academia, because it really has descended into debate, ego-based debate that seeks to win an argument or to assert one's thought over another person without really listening to the other side, which is what true dialogue is about. So dialectic comes from the Greek, dialektike, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, probably mangled it. Related to dialogue, the dialectical method, a discourse between two or more people holding different points of view about a subject, but wishing to establish the truth through reasoned argumentation. I would supplant the word dialogue, because argumentation implies the bringing in of emotional energies or emotional attachments to ideas that cause so much conflict. Dialectic resembles debate, but the concept excludes subjective elements such as an emotional appeal and rhetoric. And the word rhetoric, what does that mean? The art of persuasion with grammar and logic, or dialectic, is one of the three ancient arts of discourse. So dialectic is logic, it's using the lower concrete mind, and we can only go so far with that, of course, with regard to ideas. And of course, we have a diagram over here. Some of you may be familiar with the Hegelian dialectic synthesis that results from thesis, antithesis, and so forth. I would guess that most esoteric students have no idea what this is. I'm pretty ignorant about it myself either. I know I passed over it in my history lesson at school. So we aspire to work from the soul level, but many of us are ill-equipped to even work at dialogue at the physical personality level. To the point I want to make this talk. Just before I go to the next slide, I'll just read Dennis's comment here in the chat, reading this quote, which is the one I read out before about Russia, USA, and Britain. One must realize that it's more than 80 years old. You have to understand that Russia was a completely different country back then. In addition, Russia then included Ukraine, indeed. And I kind of took that for granted that everyone would realize that. But thanks to the reminder, Dennis. Yet many of the energetic principles that DK laid down at that time still apply, in my view, through really looking at those different nations. And of course, but we have to be flexible to a degree. Of changes do happen, yet we run a fine line between dismissing things that were written 100 years ago in favor of some revisionist kind of history in the present day. So it's a fine line to tread there. So the healing of nations, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of nations, from Revelation 22:2. Oh, a lot of twos there. If we aspire to bring about healing of nations at the soul level, of working from the ashram, so to speak, but are still locked into the impasse of opposing views, is there a dichotomy, disconnect, contradiction, a lack of alignment? How to reconcile, to rise above despite entrenched differences of both parties? aspiration to work at the soul level is one thing, but endless bickering at the personality level means that two parties are caught in a cul-de-sac where nothing is resolved, like this little housing cul-de-sac here. Both parties feel that they are right because of their information gathering, their cultural conditioning, and their general perspective on the world. But what does it mean anyway to work at the soul level? We tend to throw these phrases around, but it's a little bit vague and nebulous at times. What does it mean to work at the soul level? How do we work with the souls of nations? Coming back to the ray and the astro-rayology of each of the nations is one place to start. How do we connect with the energy of the zodiac sign and ray associated with the nation's soul? How do we summon the national angel or archangel of the nation? This is coming back to how do we work more consciously with the Deva kingdom that we're invoking in this daily meditation. We don't have esoteric knowledge about the Deva kingdom. We need at least some knowledge there to know what we're connecting with and how to connect with them safely. So these are all things that will be developed during the Aquarian age as the human kingdom and the Deva kingdom will come much more closely together in a more conscious cooperation. Another table that you can look at perhaps later, it may be confusing for some of you, but I've just listed Switzerland and Geneva, who have been given zodiac and ray assignments, Britain, USA, Russia, London, New York, Washington, and Moscow being four primary cities that are related to the planetary center of New York, of course, but Washington being the political center in USA. And they've all been given assigned by DK, astro-rayological energies. And so again, as in the map I showed you before, we have places in common. We have the Aquarius personality of Switzerland, for instance, linking with the USA and Russian soul, linking with Moscow's Aquarius personality. And I haven't drawn in too many arrows here because it just looked too confusing. But we can make many other connections, for instance, Moscow's Taurus soul, as I mentioned before, with Britain's Taurus personality. USA's Gemini personality with Britain's soul. And of course, the Leo here, that's quite, Leo being not sure whether it's the personality or soul of Geneva. I haven't been able to work that out yet. DK just gives it as ruling Geneva. Linking with the Leo soul of London and the Leo personality of Russia. So then, of course, we have the rays in common. Geneva's first ray soul linking with Britain's first ray personality. Britain and the USA, both second ray souls. USA and Russia, both sixth ray soul. Russia's seventh ray soul linking with London's seventh ray personality. And so on. New York's second ray soul linking with obviously the nation, but also Britain's second ray soul. So I'll leave it at that. A lot to take in, obviously, and I'll make this available on our page for people to peruse in their own time. Irina says, is Taurus the personality of Moscow in particular? That's right. No, sorry, the soul of Taurus. Aquarius is the soul of Moscow, which links obviously with the Russian Aquarius soul. So extraordinary kind of Leo Aquarius, strong Leo Aquarius associated with that nation. Of course, they're two polar opposite signs. And just to mention that, as we move into the Aquarian age, the Leo polarity is being activated in terms of a kind of individuation of humanity, of them rising out of the previous sign Cancer's mass consciousness into more individual expression. And this is what we've been seeing in the last century. People individuating, nations individuating more, becoming into more specific expression, if you like, more advanced mental expression. And this is part of the problem right now, of course, because we are dealing with the shadow of the fifth root race and the shadow of the lower concrete mind, the pride of mind, and the humility factor that was discussed yesterday. So another comment in the chat, perhaps, just about time up, I think. Yeah, a couple more minutes. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Or you can put your hand up if you want to. A lot to take in, you know. But truly, we are looking, we've been given the tools by the masters to work with. And this is really this kind of work is really putting the spade in the soil for the first time, turning it over. And it can never be done by one individual. We have to all work as groups with this kind of work because it's so extensive, quite complex, some of it. And of course, the meditation work has to proceed in parallel with all of the ageless wisdom teaching, because we can just read it and know it by rote with our lower minds, but unless we apply the meditation process in tandem with that, it will be flawed.